looking up all of this stuff about you. I don't even know where to start. You're a very, very busy person. Can you hear
Thank you so
me?
much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah,
Great. So you're in Australia.
I'm going to be. Yeah, right
Oh,
now
okay.
I'm gonna go to Australia in over the weekend. And so this is kind of my last like work day, so everything's a little bit hectic.
Oh, I see. Okay. I misunderstood. I thought you said you were already in Australia. Is Australia
No,
work
no,
or
this is my
pleasure?
last day. Yeah. It's for work. Yeah, I'm going to lead a workshop there for Muslim writers. So I'm excited to be able to go. I've never been before, so
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I was reading somewhere, or I guess it was your TED Talk where you talked about how you work with you're a teaching artist as well. So in addition
hmm
to being a renowned poet and no novelist and performer of poetry and filmmaker and I mean the list goes on and on. You've done so much. So you also teach artists. So is that something that's part of going and doing this workshop or
Yeah, definitely. It's basically a big part of I think what I do is that like I'll speak to universities and speak at universities and things and work with students. I in when I lived in Chicago, I was way more of an active teaching artist. Like I had residencies at schools and I would go a lot. Now it's kind of more like I'll go and do like a workshop or a series or something like that, or work with like individual artists, like one on one for a while. But I'm not in a kind of residency capacity in the same way that I used to be.
got it. Okay. Well, tell me in your own words, we're here to talk about When We Were Sisters, which is your first novel, even though you've published many, many things before. Tell me in your own words
Mhm.
how you would describe this novel to someone if they were thinking about reading it.
When We Were Sisters is a lyrical portrayal of three siblings who have been recently orphaned, and it really kind of follows them as they are managing what a lot of folks would kind of consider an unmanageable situation, the death of their parents, and also navigating adults that are not always the most reliable as they're, being caretakers. And so what it means for these siblings to kind of at such a young age inherit these roles where they're not just siblings to each other, but where they are a lot of each other's kind of primary caretakers as well, while they're also kind of learning how to raise themselves.
Yeah, it's wild. It's incredible to go on this journey with these three sisters, knowing that they just are completely unparented. It's devastating. And I know you've talked in previous interviews and things about how your parents actually died when you were quite young. And but
Mm-hmm.
you seem to have had a lot of love and support around you in a way that Noreen and Aisha and Kausar. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Kausar? Is that how you say it? Um,
Closer.
Coaster, thank you. Don't
Mm-hmm.
have. Is that something that you felt
Mm-hmm.
like was drastically different in your upbringing compared to the fictionalized world of what these orphans were going through?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a fictionalized book, and I think that what I did was tap into very real things that I've seen, not just in my life, but in other folks' life, and kind of thought about what do these bonds and what do these strains look like when there's really not that much support given. And I think something that I, grew up experiencing was this feeling of seeing all of this literature where there was like an orphan protagonist, where it was like, oh, here's an
Mm.
orphan and here's this thing. And as someone who was an orphan, gravitating towards those books, but then feeling really like they all kind of existed in this narrative that was around a big, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing. Like, it was like almost like the orphaning was a tragic law, like a way to have these characters kind of be very rootable. Like you wanted to root for them because they didn't have a lot behind them. And something that I felt was like, what does it look like to actually situate this in a thing that feels more realistic, that feels a lot more like navigating the gaps of the system, navigating what it means to be each other's caretakers, navigating when there's not really a lot of stability, and when there's still in the heartbreak of living. You know, it's not just like
Mm,
this big death that happened. It's like, it's almost like a domino effect, you know, like when that happens, what does it look like when you have caretakers that come in and out of your life? What does it look like when you don't have a lot of stability? What does it look like when you're kind of, you know, living by yourself, but everybody around you is, you know, your friends and stuff all have parents and all have kind of a different setup than you. And so
yeah.
really wanting to give some more emotional truth to that, and to also talk about the trauma that they hold and the ways that they are taught and not taught how to deal with that trauma, versus it kind of just being more of a like plot point to make them you know, feel more like, or feel like a character you wanted to root for.
Yeah, I root for all of them. I felt like I got to the end of this book and I just wanted to give all of them a hug and be like, "How do I make it better? How can I love you? It's just, it's incredible what they all go through." I'm really
Mm.
intrigued too, just by your process. You know, you write unlike most any novelist I've ever read. I mean, I don't pretend to be the greatest expert in the world, but I do read a lot. And not only does it feel like you're in this incredible mixture of prose and poetry, but also just visually, you know, it's a very visual book in terms of the aesthetic of how things are laid out. And I was really curious just about what your
Mhm.
process is, you know, when you approach something like this. Was this, you know, did you have the idea for the story first, or, you know, once you had the idea for the story, were you then sort of seeing that it was going to be maybe laid out a little bit differently? And just for our listeners to know, if they haven't been able to read the novel yet, that Fatima really finds ways to make the visual layout of their words reflect a feeling. At least that seems to be the hope. At least that was my experience of reading it that way. But certain things are blocked out, certain things are redacted, certain things are missing. Sometimes the page is turned sideways. Sometimes things are kind of shaped in more of like a pyramid shape. Some things are laid out poetically, and some things are laid out very much logistically. So anyway, I just wanted our listeners to be able to have a sense of that point of reference before diving into your answer there.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's really, really kind. Yeah, I think that for me, I've always kind of written in a way that is visual. So I have a book of poetry that came out called With the Breath. And then in that book, and a lot of the way that I kind of approach poetry is often like this idea of like, well, how does the form match the content? Like, how are we kind of pushing just what we see, what we're the syntax and the way that we're experiencing the emotion of the writing, but how do we kind of create that into a visual dynamic and a visual form as well? And so for me with the novel, it was really important for me to kind of do that and to make sure that that was a really big component of what was um, included in the novel. And you know,
Mm,
writing a novel is quite difficult. I think a lot of folks will talk about, you know, it's like, oh my god, you have a novel, great, but the actual process of writing something is very difficult because you're kind of holding a lot of different pieces all at once. And if you go through and edit and you impact something in the beginning, it has a ripple effect
mm,
throughout the entire novel. And you have to really see through like, how would this change this? Like, how would this one detail change in the beginning change everything? How would this kind of, what is the way that this would
yeah.
affect and kind of throughout the novel? And it's really hard to hold a lot. And sometimes you feel crazy because you're just like trying to balance all of this stuff. And my friend, Krista Franklin, who's this incredible artist, visual artist, and poet, said something to me where she was like, write it however you can, even if it turns out some scribble. And that was like one of the best
Mm,
pieces of advice that I ever got. And so then in the writing of it, well, this is just what it is, you know? I think that when I was writing the book, there was a lot of back and forth between me and my editor, who I really adore. You know, it was really good creative forth. The way that I was pushing this kind of form in the book, and the way that I was trying to write something, and also the lyricism of the book. I have a poetic,
yeah.
as I said, and the book is highly, highly lyrical, both in terms of its visual layout, in terms of the fragmentation on the page, but also in terms of the repetition, the way that the prose kind of lilts in this way. And we were having this kind of thing where she, as somebody who kind of typically edits fiction, was like, well, I think that this might be, when does it skew to too lyrical, or when does it, when is this not kind of, when does this break the form of a novel? And
Oh,
the kind of thing
interesting.
that I said was, I was like, well, it's actually not fully a novel. Like, what you're doing is, I'm not really interested in these rigid genres of languaging. Like, I'm not interested in, like, well, this is a novel, and therefore these are all the rules that we have to follow in order to constitute a
Yeah.
novel. In the same way that I don't feel that way about poetry. I'm not, a lot of
Yeah.
times in the poetry space, my work has been talked about as being too narrative. And I was like, it can't be either way. It can't be too lyrical here and too narrative here. And so
Oh,
what it
geez.
is just trusting. Yeah. What it is just trusting the language, and trusting the thing that is trying to be birthed forward, even if it doesn't look like what has been birthed forward in these genres before, and so
Yeah.
allowing the kind of way of following intuition, innovation, and exploration, so that it's not just something that kind of stays stuck in this rule game of what other people expect when they think of a novel, and instead really honors what you as the author, and the creativity that's coming to you is dictating this story
Yeah.
needs to be told as.
It's so incredible that you have such, I mean, you're very established now and you've had so many things out there now that I understand the confidence now, but from day one you had such confidence in this sort of genre breaking, and where does that come from? Like, did you have certain influences? Did you have teachers that were encouraging that? I like, to me that's fascinating. I grew up in the Midwest, and it's such a, I don't know. I guess it's a very rule oriented, like, this is how this works and this is how that works. And I have spent so much time in my life kind of trying to unlearn those habits, and it's so, to me, it's
Yeah.
always really inspiring when I get to meet someone who's really, your instinct is to push against that, and so I'm so curious to hear where you feel that kind of boils up inside of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I think you can probably see this in the book, just in terms of the narrative storytelling, but being an orphan, there wasn't really a lot of rules that were
Mm,
applicable to me. So, like, there was a way that kind of living in almost like a space in the margins that people so overlook, allowed for, was definitely very painful, but also allowed for certain kinds of innovations and freedoms. And so, even in a lot of, I think what the book does is it interrogates the word sister, right? It talks about, what does it
mm.
mean when we have this kind of word sister? And this is an inherited definition that's passed down to us, that says sister, right? Like, it means the same thing for everybody. This is what it means, blah, blah, but it actually really doesn't.
I'm so excited to share that our podcast is brought to you in partnership with Seed. As many of you know, I'm a huge advocate of this incredible company and their DSO1 Daily Symbiotic, which I have taken every day for years. DSO1 is a 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic formulated with 24 clinically and scientifically studied strains for whole body benefits, including gut, skin, and heart health. I started taking Seed daily because I love how seriously they are about their science. It's formulated based on robust clinical and mechanistic research with probiotic strains. And super good news, there's no refrigeration necessary. Seed's patented capsule and capsule design safeguards probiotics through digestion for delivery of an average of 100% of their starting dose to your colon. I also love Seed's commitment to environmental health. They have developed probiotics for honeybees, coral reefs, and have created new standards in sustainable packaging. Your first month of Seed includes a refillable glass jar and complimentary vial for on the go, and refills arrive each month in a compostable bio pouch. For our listeners, Seed is offering 25% off your first order. Go to seed.com/Jen's Bookshelf. Use code Jen's Bookshelf for 25% off your first order of Seed.
When you look at that, we all have these different rules about what it means for us to be considered sister, sibling, daughter, offspring, son of whatever. We have these kind of relational terms, and we're like, this is what it means. And then you're like, no, it means something different in every single context. And in every single context,
Wow.
you have to redefine it and actively redo this. And so for me, the kind of idea of, like, there was always a tension of what what is and what the reality is, and then what the almost like terminology or illusion is, you know. And
Mm.
Terrence Hayes, this incredible poet, has a line in one of his poems that's like, never confuse what it is for what it looks like. And I think that that's such an important thing, which is like, we often so much of our pain is derived from that. It's confusing what it is for what it looks like, right? So it's
Oh,
kind of falling into the projection rather than falling into the reality and moving from where you're moving from. And if you're actually moving from where you're moving from, and if you slow down the process enough to move from where you're moving from, what you get is an entirely different set of rules then, and they're rules that you can
wow.
follow and you are creating, rather than the rules that are being told to you are the rules that you need to follow. And so for me, I think that that came from a really early age. It came from being kind of on the margins and being in this place that was undefined and creating my own rules. And then it was created by a lifetime of following them. And so another thing that is explored through this book is gender, right? Is
Right.
Koster's gender, but also all of the genders of Noreen, of Aisha, of the genders of the uncles, the aunties, kind of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And in the gender exploration too, and as somebody who's non-binary is, and somebody who's in this lineage of trans and non-binary people, is this thing of, what does it mean to really not be in the thing that people are telling you is the correct definition of what it means to be this thing. So what does it mean to be able to claim your own gender within this really rigid binary system? And I
Yeah.
think that there's so much of the way that my lived life follows that, and my lived being follows that. And so it's only natural for me to do that in artistic capacity. You know, it's only
Sure. Yeah.
natural that that would follow
Yeah.
suit, because it's very endemic to the way that my life is lived, and it's very endemic to the communities that I'm a part of, the lineages that I'm a part of, the people that I'm in a relationship to, and the ways that I want to uphold that kind of thing within my being and within the way that I move wholeheartedly in myself and in my artistic work.
Yeah. And do you get a feeling when you know something is the way it needs to be? I always say sometimes, like, when I'm acting in something, I get pushed, I get a direction or something that's pushing me in a weird way. I'll start to feel really emotional if something's really wrong. And I
Yeah.
just know it's my litmus test of like, oh, I'm going to try really hard to take this direction, but I've got to do it in a way that doesn't make me feel like crying, you know? And so do
Yeah.
you have sort of that spidey sense, something that happens for you where you're like, no, 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 this is how it has to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that so much of being an artist, and the thing is, it doesn't matter if you're working with like the best people in the world or the worst. Like, you're always going to have to defend your ideas. You know, that you're always going to have to be
Yeah.
the one that's like, no, like
Yeah.
this is not what I set out to do. And it's because you're trying to enact a certain kind of vision. You know, you're trying to bring something
Yeah.
forward, and so there's inherently tension and conflict and things that come up. You know, and I think that for me, there's so much. So sometimes I feel a lot of rage, like I'll feel rage, or I'll feel really like, it'll
Mm,
feel like a wall, like, and I'm like, no. And
mm,
you know, in that moment, I think what I have to do is interrogate too, because this is the thing of being an artist, is that it's so not a joke, and you have to really kind of go through certain things. And so you have to interrogate, is it ego? Is my ego wounded? Am
right.
I operating from a
Yeah.
place where I'm like, man, I just wanted to have a really good draft of the book. And like, you don't get it.
Yeah.
It's really easy to go into that. It's really easy to go into that, right? And there's a difference between being able to hear a note and take a note and take it really well, even if the note is not phrased well, and
Right.
incorporate it and bring something new out. And then a difference between, like that and when your ego trips you up, you know? And in the same way, like sometimes I'll be trying to do something like, this is the way people say to do this. I'll be like trying to do it in the way that people say. And then I'll have like a
Yeah.
full, like, oh, this is just not working. And then that tension is productive. And I think that there's a difference
Mm,
between unproductive tension and productive tension, you know? And when you have that kind of tension that comes up, that's you breaking against what is the set standard for you. And then you're able to have a breakthrough and go through something new. when you don't have that, and then it becomes just like an ego battle, or it becomes a thing that's like, oh, this is, this doesn't feel good. And it's like bringing up a lot of like wounds and a lot of invalidation, that feels really unproductive. And then so you're sitting there in unproductive
Yeah.
tension, like worried if you can write or unable to write. And that's not helpful. And so I think that there's a really good way of thinking through what are even the boundaries that every single one of us has individually as artists. And like, where are we learning how to discern this is productive tension and this is tension to grow, and then this is completely unproductive tension. And so creating a lot of boundaries around the unproductive tension, and then allowing for the resources to help hold you to go through the productive tension, I think is kind of an essential component of being an artist that not enough people talk about. And
I was just
so
going to say, I
different.
don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about it before, and it's so true. And so much of what we're asked to do, whether you're writing or directing or acting or performing, all the different things, is to present versions of tension, right? Like that's what is usually presented, right? And yet a lot of us are so worried about being liked, or like you said, our egos can pop up, or whatever it is. It's like that we'll start to like run from tension. And it's so interesting to like think through it the way you're articulating it, of just like having to really distinguish between the productive and the unproductive tension. That's really incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel it makes so much sense having read your novel as well. Like, I feel like that's so much of what, all the three sisters are going through at different times, and having to sort of reassess where to put boundaries around the tension in their own lives, and where to lean into it and figure out how to push through. It's really fascinating. I feel like we're having a therapy session instead of an interview. I'm sorry. I've just been like, Fatimah, solve all my problems. Well, so so within this, so going back to the aesthetic style a little bit too. So going back to that, so one of the things that you do through the entire novel is you never name Uncle. It's Uncle with a redacted name afterwards. And I have ideas, and I know like what it felt for me as a reader, but I'm so curious to just hear, what your intentions were with that, in terms of your hopes for the reader's feelings about what that represented.
Yeah, I think for me, it was something that's so interesting about fiction is the ways in which fiction can both bring you close but also distance you. Like there's a difference between like, say, like coming from a background in poetry and coming from a background, or folks who write nonfiction or things like that. And even in screenwriting or directing, where you see, you're watching people, and I think that in fiction, for me, I wanted to bring a certain kind of closeness, but also a certain kind of distance. And so the redaction makes it feel like it's like a report, like a police report, right? Or something. So it's really close, because it feels more like and you can feel the fear, right? Like these characters are looking at this person with fear, and it's scary. And that kind of, having that be your primary caretaker, where it's causing that much fear throughout your whole life that you can't even really say someone's name, or you don't really even feel comfortable saying that person's name, like that. And then also the redaction, because you're also kind of like trying to protect and trying to not, put out any kind of like libel or anything like that. Like all of the connotation of that is like pressed in just that redaction, right? So in some ways it brings the fear really close, because it makes it feel like it's very, very, very there. And then in some ways it also makes it feel like you can feel the distance between that character and the rest of the characters in the book. It's the only one who's the redaction. There's only one thing, and then also someone kind of said this to me, and I really agree with it, but it was like, it makes the reader auto-populate their own name in that, where it's like you're doing that, and then the reader has a relationship with the character. That's not just like, it's not just like someone in a book, it becomes a kind of thing where you're like, oh, I'm really like, I'm having my own reaction to this character and the way that it's
Mm.
blacked out and the way that this thing is named. And I think that that to me was really, really another layer of that redaction that felt really good.
Yeah, I got chills when you just said that, because that does make sense as you sort of start to picture your own person in that position, and that starts to
Mm-hmm.
mean something so intimate. I think I was actually doing that without even realizing it. And as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, I think I did that. And I didn't realize that I was even doing
Yeah.
that. That's incredible. Um, yeah, it's really it was a it's interesting the way that the aesthetic and it challenges you as a reader, because it is sort of genre breaking and it is outside the box, and it made me feel very present and made me feel like I had to really, I was like, I couldn't just relax in a way that I could maybe miss something. It like forced me to be sort of on the edge of my seat
Mm-hmm.
as I was turning each page, because everything was asking me to be a participant in what you were writing, which was a really intoxicating way to experience a novel. You know, it felt very much like I got to like be in it with everyone.
As many of you know, I am obsessed with Frida Salvador shoes, and I am so excited to say that this episode is brought to you by Frida Salvador. Style is a part of all of us. It's the first way we express ourselves in the morning, and it's the first impression we give to those around us. But finding that right piece that's both comfortable and expresses your individual style takes time. And that's why I wanted to introduce you to my favorite brand, Frida Salvador, designed in California by my friends Christina and Megan. They are inspired by individual style, and they're on a mission to build community from the ground up. I cannot tell you how many times when I'm wearing these shoes, someone comes up to me and goes, "Look, I'm wearing them too. Aren't they so amazing? Isn't it incredible how comfortable they are?" This shoe really has a community around it. They are the coolest shoes and accessories handcrafted by artisans in Spain and El Salvador with the highest quality Italian leathers they can find. I love these styles because they are classic but reimagined with statement details. And I also trust Frida to deliver impeccably made pieces that will be in my closet forever. I love them. I wear them almost every day. I highly recommend you check out their latest collection, and I will give you 15% off with my code Jen's Bookshelf. Just visit fridasalvador.com for 15% off with the code Jen's Bookshelf.
I was curious as well about
Yeah.
the him her chapters, or the him and her sort of poetic chapters.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like I had a sort of like a fluid sense of what I felt like those chapters meant, but I was also very curious because it felt like they were sort of pulled away from the rest of the narrative in a very intentional way, and so I was just curious what the intention there was as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. For me, I mean, so much of the bulk of the narrative is told through closer first person, kind of going through, her experiences of what is going on. And there is also so much hardship in what those girls face and like what they're
Yeah.
what they're experiencing as orphans and stuff. And even like in the moments where there's beauty, there's like a kind of quick shift to it being taken away. Like, it's like Milo and Auntie and like the fact that they're there and then they're just from these girls and you're like, oh
Yes.
man, like that's a moment where you really think that they're about to maybe have this kind of idealized family that they um are seeking, are really actively seeking. And to me, I wanted to include um, the prayers and the lives of the people who made them, because the girls will
Mm,
never know them. They won't know these parents this
uh-huh.
way, but the reader and I think it was
Mm,
important for me to show this kind of world of the people who brought them into the world, and like the hopes that they had and the wants that they had and kind of what they were trying to birth forward and bring into this space as well, and
mm,
what their intention was with the girls. And so even you know the mom really wanting kids and wanting a daughter named Noreen, and then
yeah.
you see Noreen, and you see what her life is like, and you're like, yeah, and like you were wanted, like you were so wanted. And I think that was really important for me to kind of be like, it kind of was a little bit of a hopeful thing in a world where there wasn't a lot of kind of hope, and they were faced with issue after issue after issue. And so it kind of was a moment of just being like, these girls might never know this, but they were always wanted, you know? And like,
Oh,
even what does it
yeah.
mean to be wanted when those people are no longer around, you know? And so for me, I think that was really, really important to include, and to just kind of have as being a subtle energy in the book, in the way that it is.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's again, super emotional to think about all of that. I do feel like even despite how much all the girls go through, there is this spirit of hope. I mean, it's a very hopeful novel. Like as much as you're tackling so many difficult subjects and that they're all tackling so many things in their own lives time after time after time, I did find myself really I don't know, just like really taken aback in a good way of just like, wow, there's just so much hope. There's so much hurt in this in the sort of essence of this book. Despite, like when you explain it, sometimes it's like when I was trying to describe the book to someone, they're like, wow, that's a lot of heavy stuff. I was like, yeah, but it doesn't feel heavy when you read it. Like, was that something you were intentionally going
Mm.
after or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is this is kind of a thing I've tried to capture in my work a lot, but like there is the strange, hopeful freedom of some of these things that feel so deep and heavy. So, like, for
Yeah,
me, my experience of growing up being an orphan has always been coincided with my experience of extreme freedom. Like, you know, and freedom
right.
maybe to a point where I shouldn't have been that free, you know, and that was like, maybe not the best thing. But like, there is this kind of a kind of certain sense of the joy of it. Like, there is a joy in just being able to be a little bit free, you know, and in a way that maybe other people have to unlearn a lot in order to get there, you know? And I think about
Sure.
a lot of the way that I'm always compelled by this, but so many people in my life have been like, wow, you're just so free. Like, it's kind of wild to see. And I'm like, but this came from this, you know, like that
Right.
freedom came from not having this kind of structure that everyone else has, you know? And so
Mm,
to talk about orphaning and to only talk about the pain and to not talk about that doesn't feel fully accurate to me. And so, you
mm,
know, there's a way in which, and even like, it's what people say when they talk about grief, where they're like, grief is how much you love. Like, it's not that is such a heavy energy to hold grief. It's one that most people don't know how to hold, but
mm-hmm.
grief is the like literal definition. It's love that's cut too short, you know. It's like, where does that love go? And so when you think about that, you can't hold grief without also holding love. You know, you can't hold that. It becomes a
Mm,
one-sided emotion when you don't really explore that. And so to me, yeah, there's always this kind of heaviness and this thing around just being orphans and having things that they're being dealt with, but they're also resourceful, and they're also making light, and they're also finding love, and they're also figuring out what that means. And they're also figuring out what it means to be good to each other and good to themselves. And I think that is such an important kind of component as well, is to just be like, there's these emotions, when you just collapse them into the negativeness, it doesn't give light for all of their different textures. And I think for me, the hope that comes along with this kind of freedom that these girls have, and this kind of thing that,
yeah.
and everything can be invented, and new things can be created at any moment. And so that was really important for me to include.
Yeah, it comes through so powerfully. It's really it makes it hard to describe your book in a good way. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, how do I sum this up? How do I sum up that you have, you know, three orphan girls who are navigating their religion, their background, the losses, the grief that, but at the same time you're like, wow, but they're also thriving, like they've found ways to sort of be resilient and push through and really find that hopefulness. I don't know why this is taking me back to but you originally said early in the conversation about your editor. But how did you create that relationship in terms of just like, you were saying how much you trust your editor and you feel like that back and forth is really productive for you. Like, what was the process of, finding that person, developing that relationship, and finding that trust with someone to be able to take something that is so intimate and be able to go back and forth with them?
So Nicole Counts was my editor on my poetry book, If They Come For Us. And so
Okay.
we had the history and the extreme privilege of having worked on one book together. And like, it was poetry, and I think it was her first book and it was my first book. So it was like a
Oh,
really
wow.
beautiful moment of synergy. Yeah. And it was also my agent at the time, who has left publishing, but my agent, Rachel Kim's first book. So there was this energy of the three of us being young femmes of color who all were like, this is our first kind of thing, and really writing for each other in a way that was different. She had been Chris Jackson's assistant, Nicole, and then this I think was her first like full acquisition and full book. And also it was
Wow.
in a genre she didn't work in. Like she was like, I'm doing a poetry book, and this is not like, I mostly do fiction. And so it was also One World. It was the imprint's first poetry book. And they were like, let's see, And so there was a lot of just us being like, we're at the table
Wow.
together, like really figuring things out. And so there was a kind of synergy that existed there that was very unique in an editorial relationship, because it wasn't the same thing going, and I've worked with other editors, it's not the same thing as going into an editing relationship with someone who's really, really established and knows a lot, and it's kind of like, oh, I have
Sure.
these other clients, and then I have you. It was us all kind of coming into it. And, I think that there was a way where throughout the creation of the poetry book, we got very close. Me and Nicole got very close,
Yeah.
and it became a friendship. We were also able to kiki as friends and talk as friends. And I also simultaneously, I work in Hollywood. And so there's a lot of my work that has existed in terms of talking to many a producer, in terms of talking to many an executive, in terms of talking to many a different writer. And a lot of times sitting at the table and saying, well, how do we get the best idea? Like, okay, something's not working.
Yeah.
I'm not going to just like, collapse into my ego and then be like, it's all your problem. Like, no, there's something that we, maybe you're not phrasing it right, but there's something that we need to get at.
Yeah, there's something
that we
there.
want to get
Yeah.
at, and literally the process of taking and even learning who is the kind of person who can give you a note. Is it someone who can see your vision of the book, or is it not? Is it someone who can see your vision of the project, or is it not? And how fluid that is. Like, there's certain friends that I've been writing with for a year, that I've known for 15 years, that I write with, that I have always edited their work. And then sometimes they'll send me a manuscript and I'm like, I deeply respect what you're doing, but I can't say that I know enough about what you're doing to give you edits right now. So I'll read it and I'll be your big fan, but I'm not the one who can dive into it. And it takes a certain kind of integrity to be able to have those kinds of conversations with each other, and not collapse into ego, not make it a thing about ego, but just to be like, editors are different for different projects. People are different in different ways. And with this book, there was a lot of the tension that we kind of were having around the book, and the production tension was around this genre shift and around being like, what constitutes genre? What constitutes this thing? How do you kind of reinvent and recreate in these genres? How do we trust? How do I get you to trust me enough to say that I know I can do this on my debut book, on my debut
Right.
book?
Yeah.
And it took
First
a
book
lot
out.
of
We're just gonna do it this way.
me having, it took a lot of me having to very clearly articulate a vision. And it wasn't a thing that was just came through or was earned because they were like, we trust you. It was like, no, you trust me because I'm consistently articulating a vision and then showing you why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if I can have a logical reason for what I'm doing, then we can talk about it as, cool, are you executing it to the level that we know you're capable of executing it? Are you not?
Right.
Are you whatever? How do we strengthen it? But if I'm doing something and there's no real logical reason for why I'm doing it, it's just because it's a flair, it's good, or I think it's good, or it's like, that's when that deserves interrogation, you know? And so that came about a lot through this tension that we were having, and me constantly being able to articulate a vision. And I think when I was able to do that, that was when it was able to be like, cool, we can back off, we can back off, we can let this go, we can trust you more
Mm,
and more and more in order to let your vision come through in the book. And so
yeah.
that to me really felt like what how we were able to create a relationship with each other, and ultimately knowing that all of us want the best book that's on the table. You know, we want the best thing to come out, and takes that takes such a, you know, a fine tunement of discernment, of listening to notes, of incorporating the notes, and of also honoring your vision and telling people, no, I'm not going to do that, you know, and but that only comes from practice, and it only
Yeah.
comes from having to sit there in the rooms where people are telling you that they don't think that you can do what you're trying to do, and you being like, watch me, you know, it kind of
Yeah.
all art is audacity, and it takes that, it takes that.
All art is audacity. What a great quote. It's so true. Do you find that when you're dealing with the Hollywood stuff and the industry stuff, you know, in terms of because you have a television show as well, and then you've got other things in development, it seems, as well. So do you feel like that is where you get a lot more like sort of pushback, or I don't know, people doubting the sort of the vision that you're having, or challenging the vision you're having? Or do you feel like it's sort of equally footed when you're dealing with both the literary world and the sort of Hollywood industry world?
For me, it's much more intense on the Hollywood side, and I think it's
Yeah.
just a more expensive art. You know, it's in order to make certain things, you need budgets and you need money, and you have a lot more collaborators. And so, if you can't, as a writer or as a director, if you can't clearly articulate your vision, you're having so many collaborators and unknowns come to the table, and so it can get very derailed very quickly. You know,
Yeah.
it's such a weird thing of having to be in this kind of meditative state where you can articulate your vision, but you have to be open enough for people to bring their collaborative magic to the table. You know, you have to be open enough for an actor to do something that you never thought of, but you trust them, and you're like, that's what it was, you know? And
Yeah.
it's such a dance. It's such a dance. And you know, I think in Hollywood, like, there's also the industry of Hollywood that's like kind of even separate from the art making of Hollywood, which is like,
Yep.
can you even get something past the greenlit stage? Can you really get something past, and can you convince these like networks with like a lot of corporate money that they should take a risk on you? And how do you do that? You know? And so that to me, there's a lot, and because sometimes it's in Hollywood, it's as simple as something getting chopped on the chopping block because uh, an executive who's overseeing your project, there's like four executives above them, and then that executive is like, we're going with a different mandate. So it's kind of a really different, and it's a kind of a really cutthroat industry that's different than publishing. And because there's a lot more money involved, and there's a lot of people who are there for the money, you're
Yeah.
navigating different things, you know, and I think that it's weird to kind of come in. It's such a hard thing to come in with things that are personal to you and are art and about like your interior core, and then to have people like kind of only be driven by like market sales and money, and then you're like, whoa, what did I just walk into, you know? And so
Yeah.
there's kind of a really different way that you have to kind of armor up and engage, and also be vulnerable enough to get the work that
Yeah.
matters to you across the line.
And do you still feel like you're able to achieve that, you know, feeling proud of what's on the other side of it, even though you've had to kind of go through the muck with the sort of money side of all of it, and the doubts and the fears within the Hollywood stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think about, for example, like my experience working on Miss Marvel, and it was definitely a thing where like seeing the final product and seeing the reaction to it, I was like, this, I'm so proud. Like, I'm so proud we did what we were able to do. I'm so proud that the story was able to be told in this way. And
Yeah.
just to really have that, like, because you see it, you see the impact, and you see what it means to people when you've sat there and you've toiled and you've toiled and you've toiled on
Mm,
something, and you've been doing a lot of that behind the scenes, and people aren't privy to that. And then the thing comes
Sure.
out, and then you're like, right, this is why you did this work. This is why this was important to do. And just being able to kind of really be able to stand behind that and say, like, yeah, like this is, and knowing the fights that you fought, knowing how hard, like knowing all
Yeah.
of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into that, and to be able to be like, and it it caused a certain kind of reaction. And so I think it's really, really, and you learn a lot. Like, you know what I mean? Like every project you do, hopefully you come out not the same place that you were on the other side. You come out growing
Yeah.
more knowledge. You come out knowing different things. And if you are, if you allow art to change you, that's the most transformative thing that can occur. And so, sitting there and kind of, again, it's a thing of like trying really hard to not get caught up in ego and allowing the thing to take you on a journey, and to
Yeah.
be in a co-creating journey with it. And that is immeasurable. What happens out of that is immeasurable, and it's something that I think is really, that again is a side that's not really talked about. It's like
Yeah.
vision and execution and all this kind of capitalist language. And you're like, no, it's actually about like this kind of transformation that's happening not only in yourself, but when that work touches the world, the transformations that it happens with others.
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about all of that and then kind of bringing us back around to when we were sisters, because I'm realizing we're getting close to the end of our time. But what was the very, very original seed idea that sparked when we were sisters? Like that first kind of like breath of life that was starting to be like whatever you want to call it, like you've said, like the vision or the path that you start to see for this novel to come into existence.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of started to write it just in little bursts and vignettes, and I didn't really know
Mm.
what it was. I just was like, okay, okay. And so the first part that I wrote was like the bunk bed part, like that was like the kind of initial
Oh,
part.
interesting.
And then the second part I wrote was the scene, yeah, was the scene where she's with Bobby at the lake. And I was like, these are really different. Like it was like the bunk bed thing and then that. And I was like, these are really, really different voices. Like they feel like they're different voices, but they're the same character. And so
Oh,
to
wow.
me, what it showed was I was like, oh, this is a project in which we're spanning this character at multiple points of their life. And so kind of just again trusting that and being like, cool, like I want to trust that and I want to see that and I kind of want to see it through. Um and yeah, I didn't write with an outline. I don't often write with outlines. I kind of just write intuitively and let what goes go. Which is a really rewarding practice and also sometimes a very frustrating practice because then you're just
I was going to
swimming in
say
the
it
muck
sounds
and you're like,
terrifying.
yeah, it's like you're just like, what is going on? But it's also a thing where like it's important, I think, to let into when you're in that dance of creating something. So kind of for me, it's an important thing to let intuition lead. And
Mm.
sometimes when you create a rigid, I'm so, we were talking about rebellion before. I can get so rebellious that I even rebel against the structure I create for myself. So it becomes a thing where like an outline is a thing where like I'll write it maybe like it'll be like a very quick like page long thing, and it'll be like, okay, I write it and then I never look at it again, or I write it and it's like a guideline and then I just kind of throw it
Right.
out. And so I think knowing that is really important too, is being like, what is the kind of way that I want to write. And that's in fiction, and that's in my own writing. And then in Hollywood art, you have to make crazy outlines. You have to make these. So much of your work is outlining because you have to get everybody on the same page before they send you off the script. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there is a really interesting kind of thing around When We Were Sisters that came out, which was just such an intuitive base, like listening to the character and letting her kind of lead the way more so than imposing my own structure on what she was trying to do.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear that because it feels like it the whole thing is such a beautiful, complete package that it's astonishing to hear that it's something that was intuitively driven because, you almost look at it and go like, oh, this had to have been so like carefully planned out. and it's incredible that you had faith in where the characters were taking you, and then also you have all of the knowledge and all the background to then be able to kind of like put it into the package that it's in and sort of give it the shape that you've given it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's really, I mean, I highly recommend it to anyone who's listening to us right now, because I just think that it's such a relatable novel. Like, there's so many things that are going on in this novel that have nothing to do with how I was raised or anything to do with something that feel familiar to my life, and yet it's so beautifully written and so intimately articulated that it feels universally relatable. And I think oftentimes, at least in my reading experience, when things are this specific, they become somehow very universal. Like, the more sort of intimately specific something is, the more universally relatable it feels for some reason, which seems like it should be the opposite. But
Mm-hmm.
I found
Yeah.
myself just really like, I felt so included in the novel as I was reading it, because of how visual the experience is, and because you challenge your readers so much in the way that you present your words. And yeah, I mean, I can't say enough nice things. So hopefully a lot of other people are
Thank you so
having the
much.
experience of getting to consume this beautiful novel. And the last little thing I would ask, and you've already given us so much advice, amazing advice, and incredible things that I will carry with me. But is there any one piece of advice that you look back on, maybe just really early on, as you were just starting to kind of realize you wanted to be a writer, that you would share with our listeners?
I don't know if I was given I'm not, like, kind of drawing a blank on like someone giving me that. I know a lot of people have
Sure.
given me that. I think if I were to give someone advice right now, it would just be like understanding that like so much of art making is like having to listen to yourself. Like
Mm,
it's such a thing about guiding your own process. And it's not a thing about mimicry. It's not a thing about being on or having clout or whatever. It's what it is it distills you to your fundamental self. And that's kind of the, even in whatever fiction, screenwriting, whatever, you have to know
sure.
why you're doing the thing that you're doing. And I think it's really easy to get lost in the sauce if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. And that's not to say like we all have moments where we lose that and we forget why we're doing what we're doing and we get a little bit off track and then we get back on and things
Sure.
like that. But I think the quicker that you can define, or the ways in which you can hold yourself to defining why you're doing what you're doing and being really honest with yourself about that is going to be such an incredible anchor for you. It's going to be such a way to kind of enter and to go back to why this matters, especially on the days
Yeah.
that you get rejected, especially on the days that you feel like there's a mound of work and you don't know how you're going to do it, on the days that things
Yeah.
feel impossible. It's such an important anchor to go back to why.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible advice that I'm going to give myself immediately. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this. I know that you have the most incredible schedule. You're about to jet off to Australia to do a workshop that I think a lot of people are going to be very lucky to be a part of. So, but thank you so much for being on my bookshelf, and thank you so much for writing this
Thank
novel.
you.
It's so beautiful, and I can't wait to get some feedback from our listeners as they start reading the novel as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and taking the time. I really appreciate it. And for everything that you said, it really means a lot to me.
I mean it, and we're here. We're Apartment 3C is hugely your fan, and we're anything we can ever do. When you have your next book come out or your next poem that you want, like we're here. So if there's ever anything you want to share, we will reshare it, and we're here as loyal fans.